All right, with the recording in progress, I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting of the Dunn County Board of Supervisors to order. We will begin as usual with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, and if the clerk will call the roll.
Supervisor Johnson.
Here.
Supervisor Pat Breslin.
Here.
Supervisor Headland.
Here.
Supervisor Score. Supervisor Steen.
Present.
Supervisor Zahns.
Present.
Supervisor Bjork. Gary Bjork. Supervisor Wilsey. Supervisor Quinn. Supervisor Rogers. Supervisor Witzel. Supervisor Kinnear. Supervisor Barrier.
Here.
Supervisor Calabrese. Supervisor Keeter.
He's on.
Supervisor Vogel. Supervisor Sean Breslin.
Here.
Supervisor Vandermeulen. Supervisor Robinson. Supervisor Morehouse. Supervisor Hagan. Supervisor Thomas.
Here.
Supervisor Prochnow.
Here.
Supervisor Gilbert.
Here.
Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Here.
Supervisor Bauer. Supervisor Leno. Supervisor Hartung. And Chair McCullough.
Here. I haven't heard from Megan or. All right, on to item 4, approval of the minutes. We have a batch of them. Any reason we can't treat them as a bunch? Great. Motion to,
Unless anyone wants to break one out.
okay, so Supervisor Steen moves to approve the minutes for February 15th, March 15th, and March 25th. Do I have a second? Supervisor Larry Bjork actually is just a little bit quicker off the mark there. Do I have any comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes, meeting minutes are approved. Presentation of petitions, memorials, and other communications. We just have a note here. Jeannie Miller's retirement after 25 years working in the health department. I have noticed over the last 10 years an enormous number of very, very long time Dunn County public servants retiring, and so much institutional memory is walking out the door. We appreciate their service. Public comment. Do we have anyone from the public who wishes to address the board? Nope. Anything come in electronically? Nope. Okay, closing public comment. On to appointments. You should have a list on your desk. Supervisor Steen moves the appointments. Supervisor Morehouse seconds. Anyone wish to address the appointments at all? Hearing none, all in favor of the appointments?
Aye.
Any opposed? Yes, Mr.
Human Services Board is our guest at the meeting tonight, and I'd like you all to welcome her.
Hello, everyone. I hope to learn from all of you and serve the community as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Polly.
Thank you very much for joining us. All right, on to the report of the county manager, Chris.
Oh, then
There you
I'd
go.
have to be given permission to speak. I'm not used to that. Used to just blabbing. Okay, in the interest of time, I don't have a long report, but I did want to tend a little bit to the purchase orders over $40,000 this evening, just because I think it's an opportunity for us to spend a little bit of time digging into that particular purchase order and a little bit of the history, and then it's a great discussion about mandated and non-mandated services. So prior to 2008, counties did eligibility determination and delivered publicly funded long-term care services. So what does that mean? Those are the services that we deliver to elderly individuals and disabled adults. They would be things like supportive home care, out-of-home placements in like a community-based residential facility, think like a group home or an adult family home. Things like adaptive supports, maybe installation of a home modification that would allow someone to remain in their home because they needed additional assistance with mobility, those types of things. So the counties across the state determined their eligibility. They had to be financially eligible and they had to be functionally eligible. That just means there's a series of things that you have to go through. It just isn't anyone who reaches a certain age or has a certain level of disability. It has to impair them in a manner in which they would qualify for services, and they have to be financially eligible. So the system worked well, except for the fact that there were terribly long wait lists. And the way that they worked, most of the wait lists were usually based on most in need. So say you were the parents of a disabled teenager who was going to become an adult at age 18, and say that teenager wasn't, maybe they had a cognitive disability, but they would be able to work like in a sheltered workshop or in a setting in which they had a job coach, something like that, but the family was unable to purchase those services for them. Or maybe that individual wanted to be able to move out on his own, but still needed to have some additional supports in order to be able to do that. If he or she were determined to be functionally and financially eligible, they would go onto a wait list. And quite honestly, because that wait list was determined by most in need, if other people came in more in need after him, it is him or her, it is conceivable that that person would never receive supports because they would always be usurped by someone who had a greater need. So there were lots and lots of, particularly, I think, young adults who needed to remain in their parents' care, sometimes with aging caregivers, because there were not enough slots or enough money to serve them across the state. Over a period of several years, the State Department of Health Services and the counties worked on what was called long-term care redesign. And they split the eligibility determination and left that with the counties. And they moved the service provision to managed care organizations, which has become family care. But like you hear the terms Inclusa or Wisconsin Cares, or there's a number of organizations, different organizations across the state. They moved those services to service provision to them, or people could self-direct their own care through a program called IRIS. And in exchange for that redesign, the wait lists were eliminated. So prior to long-term care changes, the state DHS paid the counties to determine eligibility and to provide those services. And our contract here in Dunn County was about $1.8 million for that piece of it. The counties and the states negotiated what amount of ongoing funding would the counties continue to receive after that transition was complete, and they settled on 22%. So 22% of that $1.8 million, and they're rounded numbers. So our amount is $396,401. This is slightly less this year. That's why the purchase order is about $330,000. Slightly less this year due to a change in timing and a little adjustment, but it will go back to the $396,401 for next year. The reason that this is important is because it's services in an aging and disability resource center are not a mandated service. They can be provided by a consortium of counties. They can be provided by a nonprofit. They can stand alone. They don't have to be under the umbrella of another organization. But counties remain responsible for the 22%, whether or not they are in the business or out of it. So this is where mandates get complicated. We could get out of the long-term care business. We're not mandated to do it. But that we would continue to owe $396,401 into forever in perpetuity. I don't know how to say that. Perpetuity. See, I was going to be so smart and use a fancy word and I can't. So we'd continue to owe that money forever. And the difference would be right now, they cut us a check that they cut us our contract and we refund that $396,000 to them out of our contracted money. If we stopped doing business with them, we would continue to owe $396,000 and it would come out of levy. So, so that's, I just wanted to have a little bit of backstory because we're going to spend a lot of time over the next few months talking about mandated and not mandated services. And I wish I could give you a list, and I'm actually working on sort of a rudimentary list for you of what are mandated and what are non-mandated services. But as you can see, it's not cut and dry. We have financial obligations, and we have less than specific direction about how much of a particular service. In this particular case, we know it's $396,401 for the rest of till it's changed. Any questions about that? Okay.
All right. Thank you, Chris. On to reports of departments, emergency communication, emergency management. Melissa.
Thank you very much. I will try and keep my report as succinct as I can here. You all have my written report, and we were kind of instructed to pick one kind of program that our department specializes in. And I'm going to pick kind of two because I have the emergency communications division and then the emergency management division. So the emergency communications, of course, is basically 911 and all of your emergency and non-emergency law enforcement, fire, and EMS traffic, as far as radios, phones, anything that goes on in Dunn County as far as law enforcement, fire, EMS goes through the Dunn County Communications Center. We dispatch for several EMS agencies, fire agencies, and law enforcement agencies. And our dispatchers do a great job, and they handle over 70,000 phone calls a year in that dispatch center. And we're struggling right now with staffing. And I just want to say thank you so much to my staff because they are doing a really, really good job of trying to keep the citizens as safe as possible and working as much as they can to handle, all of those phone calls that come into the communication center. So I did just want to lift up, how well I think that we are doing with the staffing and all the emergency calls that we do handle. So that's kind of on the 911 side. As far as the emergency management side, one program that we do have is called EPCRA. And I think I've talked about it before, but basically it's the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. And that is basically an owner or an operator of a facility that has extremely hazardous chemicals in an amount that exceeds a specified threshold that the Wisconsin Emergency Management has laid out. And basically that facility in Dunn County then would be subject to planning. And in the planning portion of it, basically, we work with that facility in Dunn County and we work with them to create a plan. And in that plan, it just identifies the extremely hazardous chemicals or substances that they do have at their facility. And we talk about the response that we would have to help them. They talk about the equipment that they have on scene to handle things like that. Response teams that would respond to calls, and basically how we would handle that situation if there was, a leak of one of those chemicals. That plan is written in our office, and then it is also kind of approved through our LEPC, which we do have a couple of the people from the county board that are on the LEPC committee. We meet twice a year. We work with those plans, and we work with some of the businesses in town, or basically in Dunn County, that have those emergency operations plans that cover those hazardous substances. So in Dunn County currently, we have 23 what we call offsite plans. And we are currently writing a new plan for a business here in town that just recently recorded a hazardous substance at their facility. So we'll have 24. It's kind of interesting that it ebbs and flows, of course, with anything, but we just added a new plan in February. So it's kind of unique that we ended up with 2 brand new facilities just within a matter of a short time. So it's kind of unusual. Generally, unless we have a new company move in. But yeah, so I just wanted to tell you all about that EPCOR program that we do run out of the emergency management side of the department. And it's basically driven by the Wisconsin state statutes that we follow these procedures and work within our community with these businesses that do have the hazardous substances. So does anybody have any questions?
Supervisor Gary Bjork.
Thank you. I know in years past, you were talking about, or maybe it was a sheriff, that there's some dead spots like up in northwestern Dunn County for communications. Has that been addressed or is that still a problem?
It is still a problem. However, we are addressing it. Just recently, the Judiciary and Law Committee had approved some funding be reallocated to look at hiring a consultant to do a study for us to address the entire county to see where there are other areas of concern may be. And yeah, and so I just had reached out to a consultant actually in the last couple weeks.
Well, and if I recall, like 2015 or so, we reduced the number of dead spots at that point.
Somewhat, yes. Yep. In 2015, we implemented the current communication system that we have. But that northwest corner is still an issue,
Thank you. Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any very important thing to say, except it was really important for our family. I got a call last week from a neighbor. It says, Larry, I just hit your dog down on County Trunk E. I think it's okay. So I buzzed in the car and went down there, and my wife showed up there and one of Louis' trucks. So now we got 3 vehicles on County Trunk E blocking half of the road with a dog that's in the ditch that's going to be okay. And thank you, Sheriff. One of their squad cars showed up and he pulled up behind those 3 vehicles and kind of brought order to chaos. So 911 did its job, and so did the Sheriff's Department. And my wife is really thankful.
Good. Well, I'm glad your dog is going to be okay.
Yes. Her name is Baby, by the way.
Any other questions on my report?
Supervisor Calabrese.
Yeah, it's not a question. It's it's more of a comment. As now that I'm on the Judiciary and Law Committee, I'm a part of all these other committees that I didn't realize was going to be the case. But one of those is the LEPC that you mentioned with the chemicals. And it's just another example of things that most people in the county, including people on the county board, have no idea that the county is doing. And I get on the Zoom call and it's people from Walmart and Fleet Farm and Anderson Windows. It's people from the DNR. It's law enforcement. It's all these people getting together to monitor if there's a spill, if there's a leak, if there's something, and it's just quietly in the background. So I just want to say how much I appreciate that. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Calabrese. I was going to make a very similar comment myself. That and reading the chemical spill plans is very sobering.
It can be. Yep. One other thing that I did want to mention, as long as I have the floor, is I just wanted to talk about flooding just a little bit. I'm sure most of you have noticed that spring is here, or it felt like it anyway last week, and all of our snow started to melt. And we noticed that, the riverbanks were getting a little full in Dunn County. So we did do a little kind of surveying last week. And, even though our rivers were very high, and actually, I believe we're going to set records at all 3 of the stations, the flow stations that we have in Dunn County, even though it was very high, the highest I've really seen it since I've been here. It's still, I think we're gonna get away with no major flooding issues and no concerns that are gonna cause like an emergency management response. So, you know, it was interesting to see how high it really was, and yet we were still able to maintain, you know, operations and nothing was at risk. So I know Eau Claire said that they're still looking for the Chippewa River maybe to come up a little bit. And it is still high, but you know, most of the other rivers in Dunn County have already started to recede, and the spring thaw flooding concern is probably pretty much over for Dunn County. So I'm happy to hear that. So if you have any other questions, I can take them now. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa. Sheriff's Department, Sheriff Biggs.
Well, I'm happy to report that Tiffany Creek in Boyceville is back down to about normal levels. And so keeping my shed and house dry, so. More good news, just you all received, I think, a 26-page written report from me, so I'll just highlight a few things and then take some questions, but good news for Dunn County, our homicide rate from 2021 to 2022 is down 300%. We had no homicides in 2022, thank goodness. We'd been having a rash of them for a while, but we also have our home burglaries and business burglaries are down significantly, which is a good sign. That usually goes hand in hand with our methamphetamine problem, and our drug cases are down as well, but some of that has to do with I was missing a drug officer for about 3 months while he had hip surgery, so there weren't necessarily a lot of cases getting pulled and worked by him. And that's generally where most of the drug incident CADs are pulled from is an investigator working a specific case. Still out there on patrol, taking drugs off the street on a regular basis, but there isn't necessarily a drug CAD pulled. So you'll see in the numbers that they look a little lower than they have been the last few years, but it's kind of a steady decline, which is good to see. Our meth problem by no means has gone away. It's still here, but the good part of that is we don't have half the heroin problem that Eau Claire has 20 miles away. So you know, they have the heroin overdoses and we, you know, 20, 25, 30 of them a year. And we have 1 or 2 here in Dunn County, and why we're the kind of meth capital of the world, I don't know, but at least it's not heroin. So let's see, incident numbers overall from 2022 or from 2021 to 2022 are up fairly significantly. Ironically, 2022 more incidents handled in 2022 than in 2021. That's just anomaly, but a lot of that had to do with traffic stops, patrol deputies being out enforcing traffic laws that they weren't able to. They were kind of pulled back the reins on through COVID and things like that. So our traffic stop numbers are significantly higher in 2022 than they were in 2021. So that helps add to those numbers. But staffing's getting better in my jail. As of May 1st, I will only have 1 vacant position in my jail, and that'll be a first for a long time. I've been down as many as 6 in my jail. And I don't know if it's the economy or what, but this last round of interviews for jail staff, we had some pretty darn good applicants. You know, Walmart, 3M are all kind of experiencing some layoffs. Walmart, because of automation, 3M's cutting back on manufacturing pretty significantly. So it benefits me that I'm actually getting some pretty good applicants now. The downside is I've got current five openings in my patrol side, which is a significant amount. It's really, my staff doesn't know what they're going to be doing from day to day, including my investigators. They may get pulled on or assigned to a patrol shift and have to have a uniform ready to work a patrol shift because my patrol staff is so low. We did just go through a hiring process, interviewed some good candidates, you know, like any other time. We interviewed about 10 candidates. There are 3 of them, 4 of them really are hireable and good candidates, we believe. Backgrounds are wrapping up on them this week, and you know, 3 of them will get contingent job offers by the end of the week, hopefully. So that only fills 3 out of 5 of my patrol positions. Another very good candidate who is a patrol or a reserve deputy for me, who we sponsored to go through recruit school, already has a job offer for Middleton Police Department down by Madison. So, you know, it's a very competitive game. You know, she's got a full-time job offer before she's finished recruit school, and there isn't much, you know, I certainly would have hired her. I would have been happy to hire her, but I can't because she isn't done with recruit school, and they've already made her a full-time job offer and guaranteed her the job when she's done. And I would have done the same thing, but her preference is to go work in Middleton. So I could have filled 4 out of 5. And it's challenging. You know, we had 10 applicants, probably 7 of them, at least 6 of them were hireable. They were certified by the state of Wisconsin as a law enforcement officer, but you have to question, how low do you want your standards to be? You know, we start digging into some backgrounds, and well, this guy was terminated from 2 previous law enforcement agencies. It's like, I don't need the headache. We're going to send him through 14 weeks of field training only to discover that the problems that he had at the last 2 agencies come with him. So I refuse to lower my standards of our professional agency. And so we're still seeking good, qualified, clean candidates, and they're tough to find. So last thing before I open it up to questions is I failed to include a review of the 2021 or 2022 financial report in your packet. Our expenditures came in about exactly where we expected them to, even with the fuel prices the way they were in 2022. But we had some vacant positions that helped kind of make that up. The only downside was that our revenues didn't come in as projected either. So we were a little low on the revenue side, but our expenditures were about what they were. But out of a $8 million budget, that's going to be expected sometimes. So we made some adjustments to the 2023 budget to prepare for that in the future. So happy to take any questions you might have.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Keeter.
I was just wondering on your printout of OMV WI breakdown, the first one there, it must be a typo. It says operate with a while under influence. Would that be a typo, or I didn't understand what that meant.
In the incident comparison chart?
Well, it's the 2022 OMV WI breakdown.
Okay.
It's one of the back sheets.
Should be OMVWI, operating a motor vehicle while intoxicated is actually what the acronym stands for.
Oh, okay. So that's first time, okay. Okay, another question, if I may. You don't mention fentanyl as a drug that you confiscate. Is that because it's already mixed with heroin or something else, some other drug?
In a lot of cases it is. It's pretty rare for us to actually find pure fentanyl. And it's extremely dangerous when you do. So we're happy not to find pure fentanyl or carfentanil, even worse, which is 100,000 times stronger than fentanyl itself. So it's rare to actually find pure fentanyl. It's usually mixed with, a lot of times it's mixed with meth. It's mixed with marijuana now. They're dabbling in everything with that. So it's rare, if we have the initial test for meth, it goes in as a meth product or record.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Uh, My question has to do with my dog incident and meeting your trooper on the side or your deputy on the side of the road, young guy. Anybody would be happy to have him be part of his family.
Sure.
So when I see him, I can't help but think about the death of 2 officers in Barron County. And when something like that happens, is there a retraining? Or is there something that comes up that says, I'm not asking what people might have done wrong, but
Sure.
how do you make our guys and women less apt for that to happen in Dunn County?
Well, train them well. And at this point, I can only speculate what happened in Barron County. I don't know. We always try and dissect those catastrophic incidents and learn from them. And cops have been notorious for years of picking on mistakes that cops did and got killed doing, but that's how we learn. So you train, you train and you train. You can only afford to have your staff, off the schedule for so many days a year to train and send them to specialized training. But a good example of that, of what happened in the city of Menominee here in the end of January, and I didn't include that in my report because it was in 2023, but I had a deputy respond to that who was very well trained, who's part of the Eau Claire Regional SWAT team. He's one of my firearms instructors, and he, is very confident in his abilities and in what he's doing. I fear the thought of what would happen if a young guy, a young gal, 1 year on the job would have responded to that. They probably would have responded differently than Deputy Bloom did. He's very well trained, and after that incident, he thanked me for the amount of training he's had in his career because it all comes back to you. When the world goes to hell in a hurry, you rely on your training. And if you don't have any training, you rely on instinct, and that may not be the right thing. So we try and train. We learn from other officers' mistakes. I've been a firearms instructor myself for 25-ish years. And, most people take it pretty serious, when they come to the range. We put them through use of force on force scenarios. So they go in with the potential of actually being shot with a little soap bullet. So there's a little pain penalty if you do something wrong. And we call it stress inoculation. You send them into a very high stressful situation, and the worst thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to get shot with a little rubber or a soap bullet. But it makes you sure you don't do the wrong thing again. So how to prevent something like what happened in Barron County, I can't say, but because I don't know how it went down, but we'll certainly dissect that when we learn the details, of what happened there.
Thank you.
You bet.
Supervisor Witzel.
Just to be clear about the fentanyl, so there really isn't any fentanyl going on other than what you had mentioned earlier with the methamphetamines? That,
It's just rare to find pure fentanyl.
okay,
It's generally mixed with something.
okay,
They're mixing it with just about anything, other kind of drugs now to kind of cut it. They call it. You had fentanyl to meth, all of a sudden you have more meth. Because fentanyl is cheap, easy to get in the dope world anyhow.
so you haven't seen much of that,
Not pure fentanyl. It's pretty rare to find that.
but it's mixed with other, you've seen
But
more
it's-
mixed with the other.
Yep, it's mixed with, marijuana is laced with fentanyl because I don't know,
Oh, wow.
dopers just can't get enough jollies. They have to get somebody hooked on fentanyl and that's the problem with marijuana nowadays is, maybe 90% of you believe that marijuana should be legal, in this room. The problem is we have no idea what's in marijuana nowadays. It's being mixed with fentanyl. It's a synthetic THC. It's dangerous for our kids, they may think they're smoking pot, and really what they're doing is they're taking in fentanyl, getting addicted to fentanyl, and fentanyl's a synthetic opioid. Opioids started from an opioid plant, you know, and fentanyl is just simply a synthetic type of an opioid.
Thank you.
So you bet.
Supervisor Steen.
I can hear you if that counts.
I can speak without, Wisconsin County Association, we had our board meeting. And the southeastern part of the state is having a lot of problems with fentanyl.
Yes.
And I was wondering, to go piggyback on the other supervisor's question, are you seeing more fentanyl in conjunction with these other drugs than you saw before?
Yeah, most certainly. We're seeing more, but it's odd that it's I mean, every drug is kind of a cultural or you know, thing. 10 years ago, you talked to a Milwaukee cop, they'd never seen methamphetamines. Crack cocaine was the drug of choice in Milwaukee, even though we were dealing with, you know, 8-10 meth labs. You know, 15 years ago, we were the second most populated, well, how do I put it? We had the second most amount of meth labs in the state of Wisconsin and Dunn County about 15 years ago. In Milwaukee, crack cocaine was the drug of choice, you know, so it's kind of regional, but we're certainly it's starting to creep into this area, more fentanyl. And I think it's probably just a matter of time, because that's what they're doing to, you know, distribute more product.
The information that was relayed to us that is very toxic, fentanyl, and there's I think it was Racine County purchased a machine for about $19,000 that can tell you what's in the bag without opening it.
Right.
And so the Wisconsin Counties Association is looking at kind of purchasing on a mass scale, because the story that was related to me that if it wouldn't have been 2 cops involved, the cop that opened it would have died.
Mhm.
So you know,
It's pretty common, and when we use precautions now, you know, that if they don't know, if they're not confident on what the substance is, and if it's in a bag, you leave it in a bag, and basically test it inside a kind of a vent hood, with gloves and through glass, so they don't get exposed. Every one of my deputies carries a minimum of 2 doses of Narcan, and so if they're exposed, you know, one's for the officer, one's for the person that they're responding to. But in most cases, even though we're carrying some Narcan that's expired, it's better to have some, and they're Narcanning to recover some of these from these fentanyl overdoses. They're Narcanning people 4 or 5, 6 times before they'll bring them back from that overdose.
Thank you, Jeff.
You bet. Any other questions? All right, thank you. See you
Thank you,
again in about a year.
Veteran Services, Greg.
Good evening, County Board Supervisors. I think everyone should have our annual report in there, and I'll start off on the second page, just highlighting how we approach things in our office as far as benefits. Categorize it first off with federal benefit assistance. What our responsibility is to the community for applying for benefits and helping manage those benefits for our veterans and their dependents. On the federal level, the most significant impact in 2022 was legislation that was passed in August of 2022 that added a lot of presumptive diseases due to toxic exposure. And I think a lot of you probably inundated with you, if you're watching television, about ads for some ambulance chasers regarding Camp Lejeune, as well as hearing about burn pit registry. But to kind of just summarize those benefits and how that's going to look going forward is toxic exposure for our Vietnam veterans exposed to Agent Orange and a bunch of other herbicides. The VA had added hypertension, high blood pressure. And that's such a significant disease for that population because so many other parts of our system are impacted by high blood pressure. So that's already really increased a large number of claims, and we're trying to do some outreach, of course, regarding that to reach that population. And then on top of that, there's also the opening up of past deaths for veterans that on the death certificates, there's typically 3-4 lines on there. And if there's any indication of hypertension, high blood pressure on there, we usually have a possibility to assist that surviving spouse. And in the back of my report, there's a large number of impact statements that we kind of keep track of throughout the year. And there's a number of them there. You can get a little bit more detail, more humanized what the effect is of the some of the benefits that come into our community. The other benefits surrounding the burn pit, that's our newer veterans from the first Gulf, which hasn't really been closed out back in the early 90s. And the VA had added 23 diseases, large number of cancers, basically from ingestion all the way down through the digestive system, and then a lot of respiratory conditions. So it really draws a lot of emphasis and highlights on the cost versus benefit to keep us safe, basically going all the way back to our Vietnam veterans and moving forward, and as well as even on the bases, the hazards that a lot of these young men and women encounter. Related to more federal benefits, the Veterans Health Administration, along with that act, it's also opened up a lot more individuals that can access the VA for healthcare. And I've got some reports on numbers that for our Dunn County veterans in regards to the healthcare costs that they receive and the number that are registered in receiving those benefits. The National Cemetery Administration, that's all the burial benefits, business as usual this last year with that. Nothing really significant or out of the ordinary or impactful that I would mention with that. At the state level for veterans benefits, we've seen an uptick in dependency and indemnity compensation, which is a benefit for surviving spouses to receive ongoing benefits, as well as at the state level, they can receive a property tax credit. And so if you look at your Wisconsin tax return, I don't know if it's like second page or third page, I don't know the exact block, depends on what form it asks if you're a disabled veteran, and there's qualifiers for that. And we've seen an uptick of that. And I think that has a lot to do with some of the passing of this legislation over this last year. And then on our local benefit assistance, we operate a Soldiers and Sailors Relief Fund. That's all tax levy dollars, $13,146. We've seen a lot of those funds have been used in the past for transportation costs to healthcare. We've seen a reduction in that, and that's a direct result of the VA improving their healthcare access. So our local veterans do not have to drive all the way to the main hub up at the Minneapolis VA Medical Center. They can receive authorizations to get care locally through Mayo, Marshfield, Prevea, and a lot of them are utilizing that, and it's going very well. Moving on to the next page, budget, just to inform you, three cost centers. Our grant that we received, zeroed that out. The other two, a little bit of money left over. So don't have to explain any overspending. And on the bottom part, I have some tables in there. Hard dollars for Dunn County based upon these federal benefits. $25 million comes into the county. A number of different ways, but the largest ways is through the healthcare costs. And if you look on there, the medical care and unique patients, we have in the numbers we're looking at, I'm doing a 2022 report, but these numbers are 2021 because it's a large organization that's pulling these numbers together. We have 964 veterans that use the VA healthcare system. And basically, I would call it a $10 million savings in healthcare because it may not burden our Medicaid programs and things like that if they're utilizing benefits that they've earned. Compensation and pensions, disability, and so those veterans that have been injured, exposed to toxic chemicals. They're receiving around $13,700,000 that come in to help. And those are real dollars that come into our county that get spent. And I just draw your attention to, we started tracking retroactive disability payments. So when we do lengthy appeals, as we're trying to walk through the system with the federal VA, sometimes it can be lengthy, 5-6 years before we can get an approval. They'll backdate those funds. And so we've been kind of keeping track, just more of curiosity. And so you'll see that we didn't track 2021, but 2022 we did, and there's $645,000. And those are like real deposits going into accounts for individuals that in theory have had their earning potential impacted because of their service, either through orthopedic injuries, toxic injuries. And so those are the ways that we want to try to be able to show the impact of what's happening. Highlight a benefit. I mentioned the acronym is DIC. So dependency indemnity compensation is for those surviving spouses and dependents. When they lose their loved one because of something related to the service, and it can take years when you've been exposed to a chemical such as Agent Orange herbicide, to radiation, to a lot of unknown stuff that has been going on in the Middle East. There is a benefit that exists that we ensure that surviving spouse gets entitled to a lot less money. It's about $1,500 a month tax free, but then we can access property tax credit. So then maybe they can stay in their home. So the last part, the impact statements all exist on the end of the report. And just to humanize, these are real Dunn County individuals that there's no personal identifiable information, just the situations. So I'd encourage you to read those. Could be your friends, your neighbors, loved ones that have had something impactful done, and so that you know that the money you're spending is going to something worthwhile. Pending any questions, that'll conclude my report. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Greg. All right. On to 10, consideration of reports, resolutions, and ordinances to the county board from the executive committee. Resolution adopting the fiscal year 2024 to 2028 capital improvements plan. Chris, you want to? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry about that. Can we get a motion on that? Thank you, Andrew. Supervisor Morehouse, Supervisor Zons. All right. Now speaking to the motion.
All right, you had in your packets a copy of the complete 24 to 28 plan. From what was looked at the workshop at the end of March, there were some changes made at recommendation. First, the highway committee advised that they were good with pulling the planning money for a Rock Falls facility, which was $65,000 in 2024, and then the actual construction of that facility slated for 2025, and came up with an alternative plan for that. So that came out of the numbers. And the other thing that came out of the numbers was the executive committee decided to recommend eliminating demolition of the buildings, the outbuildings that are behind this facility and the smokestack, and instead setting aside $25,000 a year for the next 5 years, with either the most immediate need to the one building will be that it will likely need a roof. So either whether it's demolition or roofing, whatever ends up happening with that building, there would be some money set aside to be able to fund that. So those changes dropped the capital requests for 2024 by $300,000. So the final number is $3,264,000 for those projects. So I'll pause there to see if there's any. I'm sorry I can't show this all to you, and it's just too large of a document for me to show it to you all in one fell swoop. But if you have any specific questions, again, nothing changed except for the facilities and that highway building.
Supervisor Bauer.
I do have a question on page 2 of the facilities and parks. On that 25,000 you're putting away for 5 years, at the end of that total, you still have 25,000. Should that be 125,000?
Oh, probably.
Thank you, Supervisor Bauer.
He's always the mathematician in the group. I will definitely make that fix. I won't do it in front of all of you because who knows what would happen.
Anyone else?
Okay, you're all clear on that? All right, so now let's talk about the funding side of it. Again, in your packets, there was a extensive discussion in the executive committee. There was also a desire to bring you all of the thinking that had as much as possible that had come to the conclusions. And so I tried to include notes that would lead you through the process. So originally, we had talked about some options for funding for the executive. I believe that there were 5 originally. For the executive committee, we had created options up to number 8. So again, in the yellow, below the yellow were the originals. We did add an option number 9 as well. And then there was a deliberation by the committee. We pulled out, so the originals on the top indicate that $3.5 million. Then we pulled out the $300,000 and went about balancing to that amount. And all kinds of different potential scenarios. So there was a sentiment in the executive committee by some or all of the members, at least some of the members, to not spend all of the remaining ARPA dollars, which were little over $1.5 million, and instead set $800,000 of those aside for some of the projects that have been identified as things that people are interested in tackling. First thing that comes to mind is housing. But I think we've talked about potentially grant writer. There've just been a number of different conversations that have happened. So the $800,000 does not have a currently earmarked purpose, but would be set aside. And again, as Beata indicated last month, would either need to be spent by the end of 2024 or encumbered. So we'd have to have a contract in place for how we were going to expend it by the end of 2024, with it needing to be spent by the end of 2026. So the recommendation of the executive committee was to go with option number 9, which would use a combination of almost all of the funding options available. Uses a little bit of fund balance. We do have a healthy general fund at the moment. So or solid, some of the ARPA money, some short-term debt, which we talked about in length at the workshop. And then we do have replacement funds set aside in IT and the highway department to fund their needs, and the fees at the neighbors of Dunn County would pay for their improvements, building improvements.
And I will add real quickly, because it's one of the things that came up quite a bit is if we do not come up with a specific use for that $800,000, we will not have any trouble spending it next year. We're not going to lose the money. We have uses for it well within our normal spending patterns.
So I try to just provide a little bit of a summary on the bottom, on the top section and on the bottom section of just kind of what the end result was. And as you can see in the blue, it would leave $800,000 of ARPA, and it balances the difference of what would have been spent on ARPA on fund balance. Any questions?
Supervisor Vogel.
Thank you. So I have just a question, and I thought we talked about the difference between the short-term and the long-term debt. and its effect on property taxes, right?
Sure. Would you like me to review that?
Yes, please.
All right. I'll try to do it succinctly. So long-term, let's start with long-term debt because that's obviously easier. Long-term debt tends to be things that you're going to pay for, that you're going to need more than a year's worth of borrowing to pay for. Also tends to be things that are going to have a lifespan that will last through the amount of time that you're borrowing money for. And they generally, the amount of borrowing that happens in long-term debt is done through the issuance of a bond. And so it's less fiscally sound to use long-term borrowing for things that will have a life expectancy less than the length of the bond that you're borrowing or that you're issuing. So for instance, the common one, just because it's so easy to understand, are the squad car replacement plan that the sheriff's department goes through with a plan to replace so many squad cars every year. If we did long-term borrowing for those of say 10 to 20 years worth of debt, rolled them into a 10 or 20-year debt package, you would be paying for them long after the squad cars were no longer able to be used. Short-term borrowing, so basically our current levy cap or levy limit only allows us to raise what we would spend by our net new construction number. And for us, that's, I'm just going to say $200,000 to $500,000. So that's all the more money that we typically have. But one of the ways that we can exceed what we have to spend is through the issuance of short-term debt. So if we issue debt at the end of this year in the amount here as proposed, $532,000, we would go to a bank and borrow that $532,000 late in December. That gets tacked on to our debt service, the amount we're going to pay off. We're going to pay that entire amount off next year, if you chose to do that. And then that gets tacked on. So essentially, it will be levied for next year and paid off in that year's, the levy would be collected to pay it off. So what we would do practically, borrow the money late in December, shift money around. We have monies in various pots of money. We should have sufficient cash flow to pay off the $532,000 in early January. And then we would use the remainder of the year to collect back as the levy came in and replenish whatever fund that we took it out of to pay for it at the beginning of the year. So the interest would be nominal. The drawback or the consequence of that is that amount does get placed onto the tax levy for 2024 contained within that year. But as we indicated earlier, last time, it would raise the average $150,000 assessed. Is that right? Equalized. I was chastised. Duly so. Equalized. Would raise the tax bill by $18.91 on $150,000 of equalized value. Does that help?
Supervisor Witzel.
Question, ARPA, is that like a grant kind of thing, or what is ARPA exactly?
That was the American Rescue Plan Act.
Okay.
Those were the federal dollars that came about as a result of the legislature moving forward on spending money related to COVID. So some of the attempts to address some of the needs that were COVID related.
That's got to go back, be paid back or?
No.
No, okay.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to be deceptive. We're all paying for it
Yeah.
but yes,
Yeah.
but we don't owe, Dunn County will not owe anything back.
Supervisor Bauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On an email I got from the Wisconsin counties, there's that Amendment 81. I don't know if corporate council could touch on that a little bit, and did it pass today, or if it did go through, and then what is the clawback? They're trying to call back some of that money somehow?
I'm not familiar with what the legislation you're referring to.
It was on my email today, it come from the National Associations of Counties, NICO.
Is it federal or state?
I think it's federal, because they said, well, state senators is what they're saying. They're trying to pass that amendment to claw back some money, and I don't know if it's earmarked that we can lose it. If it's not earmarked, they can take it. I'm just kind of questioning that.
Do you believe Supervisor Bauer that what did it look like? It was ARPA money, or is that some of that opioid settlement money?
No, it says ARPA.
You don't know? It's who? Let me say something.
Yeah, I believe it was legislation that's being contemplated in the House. It is unlikely to pass the Senate. So even if it passes the House, I think the likelihood that they will be clawing back any ARPA is very, very low.
Okay, thank you.
Took me a minute to sort through all of the information. Supervisors ons.
It's actually a Senate amendment to the Fire Grants and Safety Act that Senator Rick Scott has attempted to attach to that bill that would claw back ARPA funds.
I think it's still quite unlikely.
It's
but
quite unlikely that that will go through. But just for clarification.
thank you, Supervisors ons. Supervisor Quinn.
Mr. Chairman, do you want a motion on one of these options, or
We actually have a motion.
do we have a motion to approve a specific option?
I believe it's to approve the option 9.
Was that the motion?
You
originally?
have, so the resolution adopts the 2024 to 2028 CIP plan.
Right.
And then I don't know that was it specified in the option?
We do
Or
not have
in
we do not have a separate motion for the funding, so I presume that the funding is then included in the.
Okay.
And
For getting the funding, and it doesn't, the motions I heard it, doesn't specify which of those options were.
Supervisor Dean.
If I might, I think the executive committee took action to recommend this to the board as a whole. The board as a whole would have to have a motion, a second, and vote to move it on, is the way I'd understand it.
Yes, we do have a motion in a second. The question is what the motion in the second entails.
The motion, if it's gonna follow the recommendation, the executive committee would be option 9, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So that was Supervisor Morehouse.
And you could probably offer
So
a,
just a second.
For clarification, I could offer,
Do you want to?
friendly
would that be
amendment
helpful? Do you think?
clarification.
I'm just.
Hang
trying
on a
to-
second. Supervisor Morehouse, you made the motion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the motion, as I assumed it was being made, was to accept the recommendation of the executive committee and move forward on the CIP as proposed.
And Supervisors ons, you had the second, or does that comport with your understanding the motion, or do we need to?
I second that.
All right. So that is the motion as it stands. Does that answer your question, Supervisor Quinn? All right, Supervisor Rogers.
So I guess I'll just go on record as not supporting this motion. I'm more inclined to spend the ARPA money now, and if a well-intended project comes available in the future, we can then set aside money for that project at that time. So I don't support the setting aside $800,000 in ARPA money and borrowing long-term at this time.
It would be short-term borrowing, but
Mr. Chair,
yes, Supervisor Johnson.
is there a reason why we couldn't spend that 800,000 this year? And then if we have some reason we need to borrow short-term next year, we could do it then? I don't understand why we'd want to borrow short-term when we have the money now we could use and we could borrow it next year. Or am I wrong?
The motion was made and passed by the executive committee There is not any formal reason that wouldn't be the case, but the motion was made and passed by the executive committee to hold back $800,000 of ARPA for potential one-time expenses. So that was it was the will of the majority of the executive committee.
Mr. Chair, can you tell me the thinking on that? What was the reason?
Supervisor Quinn looks like he might want to speak to that.
I can try, Brian. If the ARPA funds are reserved, they would not be included in the CIP plan. So if they are, we would not be able to use, most likely able to use, as I understand it, there would be difficulty. We would probably not be thinking of using borrowing to pay for any projects that we might want to do. We have to take it out of the regular budget. That's my understanding.
Supervisor Morehouse, you look like you wanted to add something.
Well, I will just add something since I think everybody in this room recognizes that we're probably budgetarily and in terms of long-term debt in a healthier position than we have been in a long time, certainly since I have been on the board. It seems pretty sensible to me to go forward with short-term borrowing. I mean, none of us would want to still be paying the mortgage on our new truck long after the truck was out of service. And I think importantly, this is a pretty significant one-time opportunity with these federal dollars to take on some issues that are absolutely critical in the county, in my view. One of those issues, we are not finished with the housing study. We are not ready to make any kind of specific recommendation at this point. But if there were a possibility to do something significant with a $800,000 one-time opportunity to do something with housing, we would probably be joining almost half of the other Wisconsin counties who are trying to use these federal dollars to address homelessness, to address the housing issue. I think it is such a significant economic development issue. I mean, if we're starting to lose companies or companies are not able to hire or retain employees because there's no place for them to live, this is an important opportunity for us to use those dollars to try to do something else. And as has been pointed out a number of times, we could certainly find a use for the money. We will certainly be able to spend it for legitimate county purposes if we can't identify a housing or other significant economic development project to move forward. So I'm very much in favor of utilizing these one-time ARPA dollars to do something that will make a significant difference in the county.
So Supervisor Johnson, in answer to your question, Supervisor Quinn, Supervisor Rogers, and Supervisor Morehouse collectively, I think, gave us a pretty concise version of the quite long debate we had at executive.
Okay. Thank you.
You are welcome. Supervisor Steen.
Yes, I appreciate Supervisor Rogers' opinion, and I'll give you mine if it's okay. I'm in support of this. And the reason is that we have $800,000 here. That is a one-time thing. To think, and my experience on the board has been that if we do not utilize this in the way we're thinking, and we think that we can get $800,000 down the road, we ain't gonna get it. It just won't happen. My experience on the board here over the years is that we would not be able to come up with that money. So I think this makes sense from that standpoint. Thank you.
Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Probably everyone else but me understands what a housing study is. But if we're going to spend $800,000 on a housing study, who gets paid to study what we already know, that there's a shortage of housing? I mean, what?
Supervisor Larry Bjork, the money like has not been earmarked for any specific purpose. One of the suggestions of a possible use for the $800,000 was to address housing needs. The housing study itself has already been paid for. So none of this money would be addressing the housing study itself. It would be potentially, if this board decided to spend money on housing, it would be to address needs that were identified by the housing study. Does that answer your question?
Not at all. Okay, it even is more twists my tail. Are you suggesting that Dunn County is going to be producing housing for people to work in Dunn County?
I'm not suggesting anything.
Well, what is the housing study?
What the housing study did was it identified needs for housing, workforce housing, low income housing, retirement housing in Dunn County. Now, some of the members of the executive committee have suggested that it might be useful to spend some of the ARPA dollars as a one-time expense on addressing some of those housing needs.
Okay, then you still didn't answer my question. Are we going to take ARPA money and build places for people to live? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that would be one possibility that this board could decide to spend money on. If the board does not decide to do so, it wouldn't. I don't have a strong opinion on it.
Okay,
So
I would think the people that drive on County Trunk B would suggest to you that we need to spend ARPA money on fixing County Trunk B more than we need to provide dollars to provide housing for low income, for disabled, for people to work in the Dunn County. I mean, that's what you're telling me is
no,
that.
I am not in a disagreement with you. I am telling you that is an argument that was made. It was not an argument that I made.
Okay,
So
okay.
if you would like to have,
The housing study says that we need housing to bring people to work and live in Dunn County. The
yes,
housing study said that we need low income housing. The housing study said that whatever else, and we paid for that with county money. Now we're going to take county money and spend it on what the housing study said we need to do.
that's not a matter that is currently on debate at this meeting.
Okay,
The
well,
question,
it is because
well, no,
it is because you're saying that we need to hold back the 800, somebody suggested that we need to hold back $800,000 so that we can meet the needs of the housing study.
it was suggested we did not earmark any money of that $800,000 for any specific purpose. It was suggested that might be one-time expense, but it would have to go through this board. So at this point in time, the $800,000 under discussion is under discussion as a potential expense for one-time needs. That might well be pavement. It might be a housing. It might be, I don't know, broadband. What that $800,000 would go for is not the topic of discussion at the moment. It's setting aside for potential uses.
Okay.
And
Well,
again, I'm not making the argument. That was the vote of the executive committee.
well, you're the chair. I didn't think you were to make any arguments, actually.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I'm not making the argument. I didn't make the argument at exec.
Got it. Thank you.
I'm just trying to referee the argument in this particular case. Supervisor Kinnear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of go back to the beginning here. We have used, how many million, Chris, so far of ARPA we've already spent?
So we had $8.8 million to start and some change. And you have coming into 2024, you would have $1.5 million left. The other of it has been allocated to projects in previous
Okay.
CIPs.
So we have spent 7 million, around 7 million, to kind of keep our county afloat. We had some hard times and it helped. But it's kind of been piecemeal here and there. It's kind of hard to see where it is. If I spend this money on a road in 3 years, 4 years, it'll be gone.
So we spent a lot of money and it really helped us. I would really like to see us take a set amount like this 800,000 and put it towards something that's lasting, long-term and important for our county. Now, if that's eventually housing, okay, it's whatever it is, if it's economic development. But it seems like this is a chance. We have an opportunity here where we're not going to have to pay a whole lot in short-term borrowing. We've got a fund balance. We're going to use some of the ARPA. So it seems like a one-term shot to do something that's lasting, that can help us 10 years, 15 years down the road. That's why I'm going to vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Kinnear. Supervisor Gary Bjork.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but we got, 9 options here. And it seems like the executive committee has a lot of influence, but the final vote is on the whole county board. They're the ones of standing, correct? Am I mistaken?
Absolutely. It is,
Okay.
the board will
As a
ultimately
whole.
decide. Yes.
Thank you.
This is merely the recommendation of the executive committee. Supervisor Quinn.
Thank you. I appreciate Supervisor Kinnear's comments. I think that I agree with the specifics and the sentiment of that as far as good government goes. And I don't want to belabor the previous points, but the housing, I do one point about the housing study, which was paid for out of grant funds and I don't think we had any very much Dunn County money in it, but it did reveal some problems. And like Mike says, the scope of those problems is going to require some special effort. And this is an opportunity potentially, if we decide to direct those resources to solving that problem. So for example, the degree of housing shortage of all types in Dunn County, when the housing report is done, the preliminary data is sort of shocking. It's an enormous problem. And we've had employers who have come and to the county meetings and said specifically that they would like to add a second shift of 30 or 40 workers, but they can't do it because they don't have any place for those people to live. And those are $35 to $40 per hour jobs. That kind of thing affects the future of our county. So what the housing study is going to do is show us a problem, but before it comes to us, it will also offer some potential solutions, some potential strategies that the county might adopt in order to solve the problem. And that was what we talked about when we first initiated the study. We don't just want numbers. We want to come up with some ideas that we can think about taking action on. When those ideas are presented to us, if we reserve the SAFTA money, we would have funds available to consider whether we want to adopt any of those considerations. Same is true with broadband. The federal government will have over the next 3 years, 4 years, maybe we are aware that that there will be multi-millions of dollars available to our county that haven't been available before to deal with broadband expansion and broadband access for our citizens. Again, an equity issue, but also an economic development issue. If many of those funds will require some level of county matching funds. And we have already used some of ARPA funds for that purpose. And we could use these ARPA funds if we wanted to, if that was an important consideration at the time. The county manager earlier mentioned, these are just ideas, mentioned the need for potentially to have a grant writer, an employee in the county that would do grant writing, primarily because there are all these opportunities to receive funds to deal with important needs of the county that right now we don't maybe have the personal resources to go after. Not saying we do that, but if we wanted to, we could use some of these funds to help assist that kind of effort. if we decided that we needed to pave County B, we could use them for that. So it's just flexibility for us to do what we want with our county. If we think those things are important, and we think that taking a serious look at whether we can want to do those things, then the best way to assure, as Supervisor Justine pointed out, that the money is available is to set it aside in these funds. That's what these funds are for.
Thank you, Supervisor Quinn. Any further speaking?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Supervisor Keeter.
Yeah, I think I agree with Mr. Kinnear and some of the others that I think it's a good idea that we just sit on this money for a year. I don't really think we know exactly how to spend it, and it would be nice to spend it on something that has a long-term investment for the county. Housing might be it. There might be some other things. One thing that comes to mind with me is a geothermal system for the judicial center. That would cut our operating costs for the next 20 years substantially, and it'd be a good investment. So I think it'd be good to just sit on this for.
Thank you, Supervisor Keeter. Supervisor Prochnow.
Yeah, I just want to go on record too. I was actually against option 9. I actually liked option 4 where we didn't borrow any money and didn't raise any taxes up. So just to go on record.
Thank you, Supervisor Prochnow. Supervisor Wilsey.
So I'm very aware of the housing situation. I'm a property manager in town. And the thing that concerns me about raising taxes is it's only 19 per 150, but I have a certain complex, it's 40 places, it's about 4 million in value. So I raise this 500. And my owners like to make a certain profit margin. So I'm gonna raise the rent on the people that live there. And we're talking about low income housing. But if we raise taxes, then we don't have low income housing because I have to keep raising. So I would like it if we could look at options that don't raise taxes, because if we're not really setting this money aside, we're actually taxing people to have the privilege to set this aside. So I would not be in favor of this one.
Thank you, Supervisor
And then,
Wilsey.
roll call vote on it, please.
Sure. Any further speaking?
Can, Chair McCullough, would you like to just speak to if the resolution fails, then what happens next? Just so people go into the voting, understanding what we would do.
Well, given that this is a plan rather than an actual borrowing motion, it's a simple majority vote. If it fails, Nick? It goes back to the executive committee to talk about it and come back with an alternative. Any further speaking? All right, then, roll call vote.
All right, the voting is active on your touch screens in front of you. Touch the screen if it does not appear active. While you're voting, I will ask for the following online votes. Supervisor Johnson?
No.
Supervisor Johnson votes no. Supervisor Pat Breslin?
No.
Supervisor Pat Breslin votes no. Supervisor Barrier?
Yes.
Supervisor Barrier votes yes. Supervisor Thomas?
No.
Supervisor Thomas votes no. So Supervisor Keeter, sorry.
Yes.
Supervisor Keeter votes yes. Your screen. Okay, that's everyone. That fails.
All right, the motion fails. It returns to the executive committee.
Oh, Supervisor Gary Bjork, I'm sorry, we didn't log your vote yet. Okay, perfect. There we go. Motion failed.
Okay,
Supervisor Steen asked.
Supervisor Steen, Andrew, you want to give the count?
Yes, so the yeses with the individuals joining us online are 12. The nos with the individuals joining us online are 15. What's on the screen does not include the people who voted online. Correct.
Correct.
And there's 2 supervisors absent.
All right. Ordinance amending chapter 2 of the Code of Ordinance and Rules of the Board. First reading, this was referred back. This was the rule change to codify our more or less new practice with people being able to participate virtually in meetings more often, as long as they've got the permission of the chair of the appropriate meeting. So this is a first reading. Do we need to get a motion on the floor?
Yes, please.
So I'd need a motion for this. Supervisor Rogers and a second, Supervisor Steen. And at that point, we can have discussion at this point, but the vote is next meeting.
If anyone feels particularly compelled to talk about it, they may, but the discussion and vote is next month.
Anyone feel a huge need to leap in? Supervisor Quinn. Oh, sorry, that's from last time. All right. Seeing none, on to C, ordinance amending section 2.19 of the Code of Ordinances, Rules of the Board, first reading. Can I get a motion? Supervisor Sean Breslin makes the motion. Supervisor Morehouse has the second. Again, we'll have most of the debate on this at the next meeting. Do you feel, Nick, do you feel the need to address this at all now?
I can, it's the purpose of this revision is just to provide more details about the parameters of attending closed sessions and emphasizing the importance of confidentiality of the proceedings.
I brought this up to Nick after last spring's WCA meeting, where they noted that there is no statutory penalty for violating confidentiality of meetings, that it is up to the individual boards to set the rules for those things. So they suggested that that was a thing that most boards should have in their rules because confidentiality is terribly important. So we'd like to add that to, I would like to add that to the to our code of meeting. Okay, on to the budget calendar. Chris, you're.
Oh, what I got going on? There we go. All right, so you have this in your packets as well. So if it is not clear to you yet, one of my primary goals as the county manager is around communication. And I believe that you make enormous decisions almost every time that you meet, and should have the opportunity to do so with solid information. We are entering the 2024 budget season very soon. Later this evening, you're going to decide, or in a few minutes, you're going to decide on approving the budget calendar. And there are a few things you should take note of. First, last year we did a budget workshop for review of the entire county budget, but standing committees did not approve each department budget as they had in the past. This year, we'll have the department heads present their 2024 budget requests to the standing committees for approval during the month of August. So those budgets will be due to the administration department on July 7th. And then we'll have a month to work through with the department heads to kind of finalize and make sure everything is all shored up. And then they will bring you those department budgets during your August standing committee meetings. At the end of August, on Wednesday, August 30th, we'll hold a county board budget workshop similar to what we did last year. The start time is yet to be determined, but in order to fit it into an evening, we probably need to look at a little bit earlier start time, perhaps like 5:30 or 6 o'clock. I believe last year on a Saturday, we completed our workshop in about 4 hours. And I think we learned some things that will help us to do that a little bit faster. So I think that we can get it in an evening and not having to give up one of your 2 weekends of the summer. Oh, wait, that's a commentary. We will have more than 2 weekends of summer. So then after that budget hearing, the executive committee starts to work on the 2024 requests at its September meeting. Remember that all those meetings are recorded, so that if you want to listen to the discussion, similar to tonight's discussion, you can always do so on the county's YouTube page. And of course, you're always invited to attend in person as well. At the September County Board meeting, you'll have a chance to weigh in on what you learned in August at the workshop. And if you'd like to see changes or explore other options, etc., that's a great time to say so. The goal is to have a final submission ready for the October County Board meeting of what our budget will look like for 2024, because the public hearing notice, which requires all of the dollar amounts in it, has to be published, has to be sent through to be published the next day. Literally the next day. Then final approval of the 2024 budget will occur at the November meeting, which is always on the first Tuesday after the second Monday of the month. And this year it's November 14th. So if at any point from here on forward, whether it's about budget or whether it's about capital improvements or anything financial related, really anything related, but anything financial related, that you would like to sit down with me or Beata or both of us to talk about any part of the budget, how it's put together, what options exist outside of those that are proposed, etc., just let me know and we'll find a time to meet. And I want you to have all the information that you need, but also to facilitate as seamless a process as possible through preparation and transparency.
All right, now I would need a motion to approve the budget calendar. Supervisor Witzel and Supervisor Sean Breslin. Speaking to Supervisor Steen.
As it relates to what didn't pass tonight, is that going to change your calendar or is it has to be amended?
I think we can still do it the way that the way we have it set up. It's just that the calendar reflects that tonight we would have passed the capital improvement plans. I will change those dates to reflect next month's meeting.
Mr. Chairman, would a special exec meeting and a special county board meeting be in order to address this subject?
I think that the exec committee, the regular meeting and the regular board meeting should be adequate to address it. I think the board as a whole has made its feelings pretty clear, so we will at exec adjust to meet the expectations of the board. But thank you for the question.
The current calendar indicates that on May 22nd, we would, well, it indicates that tonight we would approve the 2024 to 28 capital improvement plan. That didn't happen. I would move that date to after. We will still get the budget guidelines on calendar out to the department heads because that can happen regardless of capital improvements. And we'll still ask them to submit them to us by July 7th. What it would do is it would shift that date that says tonight to next month's meeting, which I believe is the 17th of May. So if I can make that change to the budget, then we don't have to, it shouldn't have an impact.
Is that all right with the person who made the motion and the second? Yep. Okay, great. Any further discussion of the budget calendar? Hearing none. All in favor of the budget calendar?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Resolution approving the Elk Creek Solar Joint Development Agreement. Let me get a motion in a second. Supervisor Morehouse, Supervisor Prochnow. I think I will hand this one to Nick.
This is, as you know, previously, a gentleman from the Elk Creek Solar had been here and made a presentation. They're planning on having a large solar electrical generation facility in the town of Springbrook. They have a petition or an application before the Public Service Commission right now to do that. If it's approved, I think they would probably, they're planning on beginning construction later toward the end of this year and completing toward the end of next year, with possibly some electrical generation occurring in 2024 or early 2025. The state law provides that operations of this size are within the control of the state government and not so much with the local governments. There are some aspects that we do have control over, but zoning, for example, doesn't apply. And so real property tax also ceases. So the facility begins to get their bill from the Department of Revenue, and they pay that to the Department of Revenue, and then the Department of Revenue distributes payments to the local governments who are taxing authorities for the where the real property is located. So one of the ways that we're able to shape some aspects of this facility's presence within Dunn County and presence within the town of Springbrook is through this joint development agreement. And it's called, now at this point, it's called a joint agreement. And it addresses things like use, taking stock of the condition of county highways that they're using to haul in heavy equipment, heavy materials, building supplies, and so forth. And their, stewardship of county highways to make sure that we don't lose the quality of what we have. And there are, I think it's called Muddy Creek, meanders a lot on the western edge of a lot of the real estate where this facility is proposed to be located. We're using this agreement to have the company that's doing this abide by shoreland zoning in areas where they might be close enough to Muddy Creek to actually be subject to it. Things like access, driveways, what can go into a right of way and what can't, heights of equipment, vegetation requirements, maintenance of vegetation, and things like that are all covered in here. And it includes the payments that are anticipated to be coming annually in lieu of the property taxes. So right now, this is, I think, largely farmland, maybe some pasture. The agreement is in the agreement, it's expressed as an estimate, excuse me, approximately $500,000 annually would be paid to the town of Springbrook, and approximately $700,000 annually would be paid to Dunn County. And again, that's in lieu of real estate taxes For utilities and large operations like this, the state just takes over and they pay the tax bill directly to the state, and then the state disperses it back. Fencing, aesthetics, sound impacts. This is our way, this agreement is our way, however you feel about having the facility located here. It's governed by state law. We don't have, there's no legal authority for the county or the town to say, no, you can't build this here. And so this joint agreement is our way of trying to protect county infrastructure, to, try to mitigate or limit potential liability or risk that comes, that could come from it. And so we've had several back and forths with the verbiage in this. We, about 3-4 weeks ago, town officials, town of Springbrook officials, the county board chair, myself, the county manager, we met and had a lengthy discussion about some of the terms. And this is basically what we've sort of hammered out. It just basically, it defines many of the aspects of the relationship that we're going to have as a regulating authority over the use and presence of the solar generation facility. If anyone has questions, I'll try to answer them, but otherwise, they are hoping that the county board approves of the agreement, and they want to include it as part of their record, their evidentiary record before the Public Service Commission.
And
Pardon?
oh, yes, they are here tonight.
I
In case
didn't
anyone has-
realize that. I'm sorry, gentlemen.
If we have any questions for them, we could, waive the rules and have them step up. I would like to note that they have been very, very accommodating in all of our discussions. And they've been excellent corporate citizens for Dunn County, just in general so far. So does anyone have any questions or comments, or this is pretty straightforward? All right, seeing none. Oh, wait, Larry Bjork.
Well, this is entirely in my backyard. And Larry Sipple and I attended grade school together, and his farm is right there where the hooking into the transmission line. So we hunted, captured mud turtles in Mud Creek. So I know how close Mud Creek is to the at least where their offices are. And I've kind of been on the fence on this all along the way. And I mean, you're presented it as we have no choice. But when it gets right down to be a personal decision, if this is something that I want for my neighbors or for myself or my grandkids, every time I have to travel to Eau Claire on County Trunkee or to Elk Mound to do business or church or something at the high school, the present of this at the E&H corner in particular is hard to imagine being anything other than not positive. Many of you know that I had driven for Walmart for many years and seen a lot of solar projects throughout Minnesota. And it's kind of nice to be able to look away when you're a farmer and see crops or see cattle or see the community. But when solar panels are there, all you see is solar panels. And then what's not been presented very clearly here is the number of substations involved with the batteries, or just the number of telephone poles or electrical poles that we put up to transfer that energy to the corner there on the Sipple property. So at one time at township meeting, I talked to a young fellow that I've known since he was in 4-H. And he says, Larry, kind of think of it as conservation reserve, CRP, that produces electricity. Well, I could relate to that because I had conservation reserve for 25 years that produced red pine forestry. And but it was my trees, it was my land. And I can't support this resolution, even though it doesn't amount to anything, because we're told you have no say in what they do here. But I want to be able to say to myself, when I drive past that and have to look at it, I want to be able to say, I did not support it in what little way that I could. So the resolution can move forward any way it wants. Public Service Commission will do what they want, but Larry Bjork, Town of Springbrook says, I'd rather have it be someplace else, and I'd rather have it even not exist. Thank you.
And maybe I maybe inadvertently misled a little bit by not having enough detail, but this isn't about whether the facility is present or not. This is about approving an agreement for many things that they would not otherwise have to do by state law. And it gives the county, it brings the county some advantage in terms of evaluating risk or so forth. And so what whether you vote for that or against that, that's what you're voting for, not the facility, but the county's ability to shape some of the parameters of their presence.
That completely.
Okay.
I just don't like the whitewash that's going on, and I'm just not in favor of being a neighbor to it.
And that's beyond our control.
But I'm still elected by the people of the town of Springbrook, and I'm able to give my opinion, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Gary Bjork.
By voting for this here, we're almost saying that we kind of approve it going forward. But we have in our zoning for Dunn County, even though it doesn't mean nothing, to protect like farmland, and the sure goes directly against that. And being a farmer, I will vote against it, even though there's no reason that's going to stop it. But by voting for this agreement, you're kind of saying, well, yeah, I support it. So I plan on voting no against it.
I would have to disagree with that characterization. You're not voting for the solar facility, you're voting for our ability to regulate it in any way. So if you vote against this, you are voting against the county's very limited ability to regulate it.
If they, for example, if they want 75 driveways and a half a mile, this agreement says they can't do it. Without the agreement, it's up to them. If they want to put 350-foot towers every 10 feet, without this agreement prevents that. Without the agreement, who knows? We don't have the ability to regulate things under law, so we're trying to incorporate that into the agreement. You know, and I'm not suggesting they would do any of those things, but superlative examples, I've always found them to be very useful in trying to illustrate the purpose of it. This allows us to incorporate some regulation of their construction and presence and use of the real property that we would not be able to do under law.
Supervisor Steen, did you?
Yes, I have a question. This development agreement gives us some control versus none, I guess. And if this this agreement is the utility shared revenue payments, is that something that happens even if we don't sign this? or
That's
the-
true. Yes, that's correct.
All right.
That is state law. The agreement is just sort of brings it out and gives an estimate of the amounts to be paid. It's probably within $1 or $2, correct, I would guess.
Thank you.
Supervisor Rogers, did you?
That covered part of what I was gonna say. But I don't know why the county would not want to have some say in how everything is run. As little bit as we can have input, why would we give up that little bit of input that we do have?
Thank you, Supervisor Rogers. Any further speaking? Supervisor Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just noticed in the agreement, number 1 under planning, at the end, it says, the local governments further agree that the local governments may not require changes to the project. Now, that's a sentence in the agreement. Wouldn't that imply that we're agreeing to not have any impact? It's written right there.
We don't have the ability to alter the construction. I'm looking for where it is.
Number 1, right at the bottom under planning.
Okay. This is something that's under the jurisdiction of the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. We don't have authority to change it or to make them do something differently that's already been in their plan and submitted. So this is a contract, and as a contract, it provides benefits and consideration for both or for all of the parties to it. I guess I would characterize this as one benefiting Elk Creek Solar, because it spells out something in state law that, we can't do that anyway. And so this just says we understand that and we agree that we can't do that. Sometimes when I'm drafting contracts, I include things in there that seem obvious or that are already in law, but by bringing them into a contract, you can carry it right with you to the table and talk about stuff if something isn't going the way you want it to. And you can point out that you can't do it. So
I was just speaking to
Yeah.
the language as it's written. It sounds like we're agreeing to.
well, we
Give
are
up.
agreeing and understanding that we're also agreeing to support the application. And I guess that's an individual, you may respond to that individually, but your vote will express, I guess, the county board's position on that.
Okay, thank you.
Any further speaking? Supervisor Barrier.
Yeah, so I want to echo the points that Supervisor Rogers made. I think that we need to go into this with whatever protections that are available to us at this point. And so because of that, I will be voting yes. But I want to problem solve. I want to problem solve because I think that the concerns that Gary Bjork and Larry Bjork are raising are important. Or what I mean is, I'm wondering if there's a way for people who are opposed to this to register their disapproval of this project moving forward, yet still vote yes on this, right? Like, I'd hate to see this contract be held back by that concern. And so I'm wondering if there's some other alternative, like if the board could make a resolution about not supporting this, if that is the will of the board. I'm just thinking about alternatives here, because I'd hate to see this contract fail on that basis.
I think we would have to bring that back at a future date, but I think that probably the more important record, as this is a recorded in public meeting, is people speaking out on their opposition to the project here and now. I mean, both of the supervisors Bjork have registered a strong disapproval of the project. I think that is entirely within their right, and I think that you've established an important opinion.
And from a historical perspective, relating specifically to this, having met with officials from the town of Springbrook, I can assure you that perhaps all of the supervisors there felt the same way. And yet they approved the agreement for the reasons the county board chairs noted, and I've noted, that it's how we're able to have our dog in the fight. Have our ability to have some regulatory control over some aspects of how they go about the business of setting that up and their presence here.
Supervisor Calabrese.
Just out of curiosity, does this count towards net new construction? Or is that just buildings?
I'll be honest, I don't know, but I suspect not, because it's taken off, the property is taken off the levy.
Okay.
So it's no longer eligible for, property taxation in the sense that we understand it, that you were discussing earlier this evening. These utilities and large facilities, they deal directly with the Department of Revenue. So.
Okay. Maybe if they made those towers every 13 feet. Maybe that would reconsider.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I want to say again, I didn't mean to suggest that's their plan, just.
Supervisor Sean Breslin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two comments. The first is to the annual payment. Is that based off of the actual wattage they produce every year? Or what it's supposed to be projected to produce?
I have to admit, I'm not 100% sure on that. Do you, either of you gentlemen know?
I can bring one of the solar folks up if without objection.
That'd be fine. The other question I have is who's going to pay for the emergency response specialized equipment in case of a battery fire at their storage units?
Okay, let me.
Thank you.
Come on up. There you go.
Good evening. Dylan Stickney, thanks again for allowing us that. Do you mind if could you repeat that first question for me?
There we go. The $700,000 a year.
Right.
Is that based a flat fee every year, no matter what the production is of the project? Or is it based a variable based on what the project produces?
That's right. Flat fee. It will be the same every year. It's based on the total installed capacity. So it's equivalent to actually how many panels are installed on the property, not how much energy it generates throughout the year. And for the second question, I will say coordination and cooperation with local emergency responders, training, guidance, and full disclosure of our entire construction plan, as well as an emergency response plan, is part of this joint agreement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if there's a hazmat response, I presume it would be City of Menominey's hazmat team, but. Supervisor Steen.
Yes, how quickly would you be ramped up to your full production in your estimation?
As in full construction complete and
Yeah.
operating?
Yeah.
Our current plan is if we were to be certificated by the Public Service Commission this year, we would begin construction in 2024, most likely, and potentially online as early as towards the end of 2025. So just a little later than Mr. Lang said.
When would the $700,000 be forthcoming then?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a very good answer on that. I mean, it would be within the first year of commercial operation of the project.
Which means after you get to the, where you want to be in that first year then, right? Not as you are building it, correct?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
My understanding is that it's prorated
Thank you.
for, so if, let's say, just as a hypothetical example, if they came online and began generating and moving electricity out at the beginning of September, you'd have 4 months of prorated
So one
for
third
the
of the
annual revenue dispersal.
Solar company sees it?
That's right.
All right, thank you.
I believe that's how the regulatory commission sees it, so. Further questions, further speaking? Okay, it looks like you are off the hook.
Thank you.
And we will now vote. All those in favor of approving the joint agreement,
Aye.
any opposed? Motion passes. Okay. Budget adjustments for Environment Services and Department of Human Services. I presume you're all familiar with these at this point. Money comes in grants, money needs to be allocated in the budget, money goes out. Do I have a motion? Supervisor Calabrese, Supervisor Steen seconds. Any speaking to the motion? Any questions? All right. This is a budget adjustment, so roll call. All right, roll call vote.
Those present can vote on their screens. While they're doing that, Supervisor Johnson.
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson votes yes. Supervisor Pat Breslin.
Yes.
Supervisor Pat Breslin votes yes. Supervisor Barrier.
Yes.
Supervisor Barrier votes yes. Supervisor Keeter.
Yes.
Supervisor Keeter votes yes. Supervisor Thomas.
Yes.
Supervisor Thomas votes yes. Passes.
All right, motion passes. Consideration resolutions, we are on to 11, consideration of resolutions, reports, ordinances from standing committees. A Planning Resources and Development Committee resolution, real estate transfer fee. Can I get a motion in a second? Supervisor Quinn moves. Supervisor Hartung, I believe, seconded. Supervisor Quinn. Hang on,
To come up for a minute and just briefly explain,
Heather, if you would.
very briefly, Heather, I'm, needs to be long.
I think you've gotten this one down to a.
Yeah.
This resolution is to revise the current real estate transfer fee revenue sharing formula. So currently the split is 80-20, 80% of the fees being remitted to the state. And this request is to change it to a 50-50 split with the county. This is not a fee increase, it's just a split between county and state. I think there are about 30 counties that have passed a similar resolution. And the Wisconsin Counties Association has also included this in their legislative agenda. Well, the split would have been 50, had the split been 50-50 over the last 6 years, the county would have retained approximately $1 million in additional revenue for the general fund. A little history, this fee has been, well, the fee was mandated in 1969 that we collect a real estate transfer tax. At that time, it was 50-50, but it was $1 per thousand based on the real estate value or the sales price is what we collected. In 1981, it changed to $3 per thousand of real estate value that we collected a transfer fee, and it was changed to 80-20 at that time. So this is just simply a request to the state to revise that sharing formula.
Any questions for Heather? All right, seeing none, any further speaking to the resolution? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you, Heather. B, Committee on Administration, resolution amending the employee handbook. I need a motion in a second. Supervisor Headland, Supervisor Zons, speaking to motion, Supervisor Headland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a recommendation, after a lot of work done by our Human Resources Department in trying to help recruitment and retention and basically get us up to speed, so to speak, in terms of being competitive in the labor market with what we have to offer potential employees, especially, or keep our current employees here in Dunn County. If I could, I'd like to have our Human Resources Department come up and speak to us about this, if that's okay with the rest of the board.
Jenna? You're up.
Good evening. So tonight, as Supervisor Headland mentioned, I am pleased to present you with proposed policy changes that are really aimed at addressing some concerns from a recruitment and retention perspective. As you are likely aware, the success of our programs are highly dependent on our ability to attract, but more importantly, to retain talented and motivated individuals. Along with many employers, retention has remained a main priority and also a challenge, especially in a few departments in particular, which we had heard from a few earlier as well. And to overcome these challenges, we have carefully reviewed and analyzed a handful of our policies, and I would like to go through them with you. I know there's quite a bit of pages in your packet, starting on page 108 through 127 pertaining to these proposals. So I would like to share my screen and help guide that discussion just using a PowerPoint presentation. One moment, please, while I work on the technology. Okay, so just to provide an overview of the proposed changes that you have in your packet, the first one that we will discuss is specific to the on-call pay. The next we will discuss is the wages and other forms of compensation policy, specifically relating to our training pay, as well as voluntary shift incentive pay specific to our 911 telecommunicators. And lastly, we will discuss some amendments to our overtime policy pertaining to what's called call-in pay, which I will describe more later, as well as our compensatory time policy. So I will start with on-call pay. So on-call pay is compensation paid to employees who are required and expected to report to work and or respond and perform work duties within a short amount of time. So if you picture this, you know, an employee that has to carry a certain phone and be able to respond immediately to certain calls during time that they're not scheduled at work, so nights and weekends. Currently, this provision as it exists now is included within the wages and other forms of compensation policy. It is currently only applicable to professional exempt employees. And what we mean by exempt is that they're salaried employees who are not eligible to earn overtime compensation. This is primarily the social worker group that is assigned specifically to a family and children's unit. Currently, the rate that they receive is $1.60 per hour for the time frame that they are assigned to be available and on call. The proposals that we have included in the packet include first and foremost, separating this provision out from the long wages and other forms of compensation policy, putting it into its own standalone policy. And also I wanted to make note that this is presented to you in a different format than we're used to, and one that we are hoping to phase in slowly as we continue to review the policies in our handbook. Proposals would expand the applicability of this provision to more employees than it currently exists now. So I've listed those applicable departments here, human services being the first, which isn't a change in that it would still apply to that social worker group that has a statutory requirement to be on call, as well as our highway department. There is a handful of supervisory employees that have a need to be on call at all times, nights and weekends, one person at a time, that currently are not eligible to receive any sort of compensation for the time that they're spent on call. This would also apply to facilities workers that have a need to be on call to respond to any issues that would come up at the neighbors of Dunn County. And that is also a requirement. I'm not 100% sure, maybe would ask Carmen on the agency that requires that, but it is a state requirement to have a facilities worker be able to respond within a short amount of time if an issue were to arise. And then lastly, our jail division has jail sergeants that are scheduled to be on call in case any issues were to arise throughout an overnight shift and other times that a sergeant isn't scheduled to be on site. The next change in this proposal would increase the rate from $1.60 per hour to $2 per hour. And we have reviewed the current usage and need in each of these departments to estimate a fiscal impact. And we're able to identify it would be roughly $2,660 of an increase to the Human Services Department. In the Highway Department, again, this is not, they currently do not receive compensation per hour for being on call. So the cost to implement this on-call pay rate for all nights and weekends for one supervisor at a time would be $10,600. And this is an annual costing. In the Facilities Department, it would cost roughly $13,312. And then lastly, in the jail, we estimate around $4,326. There are further details in the packet, but in the interest of time, I wanted to provide this brief overview. I would accept questions specific to the on-call pay policy as it's drafted in your packet at this time.
Looks like you're off the hook for questions.
Okay, so moving on to our next proposed amendment. This is specific to our training pay provision, which is currently within the wages and other forms of compensation policy. And currently, the training pay provision is only specific to correctional officers and telecommunicators that are assigned to train other new hires. Currently, this pays 50 cents per hour. And I did add that this provision was added in 2016 and hasn't since been reviewed. Naturally, with the challenges that have come up in the jail with, we've had a positive trend in recruitment lately, but it's been a long-term challenge in the jail, and then also the 911 communication center with the telecommunicators. It's been essentially a constant need for at least 1 or 2 employees to be training a new hire at any given time. So you can imagine for several years in a row that this has become a pretty standard responsibility for those few tenured employees that are responsible for training. And at this time, we recognized that 50 cents per hour for an 8-hour shift is an additional $4 for a day of training side by side with a new hire that requires a lot of additional effort and oversight and attention. So at this time, we had done a review on comparables to other organizations that provide this type of provision. And we were able to find that the more typical rate is $2 per hour up to $4 per hour, and are proposing to increase it to $3 per hour. The estimated annual cost based on a 5-year average of the number of hours that and dollars that were expended in training pay would be $1,120 in the Emergency Communications Center and $1,806 in the jail. Any questions on training pay?
Not seeing any.
Okay. Okay, so on that same note, as I mentioned, we have been addressing some challenges with retention and recruitment, specifically in our 911 center. And at this point in time, the number of staff that are trained to actually fill a spot in that center is at 8, which if you think about a 24/7 operation at 8-hour shifts a time, there are not enough people to simply fill the shifts that are needed. So at any given time, any given week, there's at least 5 shifts per week that have to be filled by the employees that are already working a full-time schedule. And any of those shifts that don't get filled by within the 8 staff that are trained to take them, those left over are being worked by management. And when I say management, that sounds plural, but it is only one person covering those shifts and also continuing to maintain her management duties day to day. So the situation has been a little bit dire, I would say, especially lately, but it has been a long-term challenge, at least for the past 3 years. There's been a bit of turnover that we are working to address. So one of the proposals that we are bringing forward today is to help incentivize the existing employees to pick up the open shifts that are available to help even out some of the burden that comes with being short-staffed. So we are proposing to allow telecommunicators to be compensated an additional $5 per hour for picking up an open shift. And this would be with a more advanced than 48 hours. And then $7 per hour for picking up those last minute shifts, usually due to another person calling in sick or other things that may come up in a short time frame. The estimated annual cost for this would be $13,312. I would like to add that with several positions being vacant, this ask is well paid for, and would eventually, the goal would be to fill the positions and then not have a need to have as many that need to be picked up. So overtime would hopefully resolve itself and not continue to be an additional cost. But again, due to the staffing level and the number of vacancies, the 911 communications division is able to absorb this cost. Any questions about this proposal?
Supervisor Gary Bjork.
Just one question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. How many shifts are they expected to take in a week's time? Is it just one is without them, not getting in trouble, but at least not getting on a bad side of the manager? Is it like one shift to pick up a week to stay on the good side?
I think it varies right now. There's not a requirement to pick up. They have done an amazing job at helping to make sure that as many shifts get filled as possible. But at this point, it isn't mandated, and we're hoping to not have to get to that point because that does really have an impact on morale and retention, which we're up against with current challenges already.
That looks like it.
Okay. All right, we're getting close, I promise. So the last policy that we are looking to make amendments to is the overtime policy. So earlier we had talked about on-call pay, which is different than call-in pay. So I know this is, I just want to make that distinction. Currently, within the overtime policy is a call-in pay provision that pays hourly employees who are called in to perform duties outside of their work schedule. It pays them a guaranteed 2 hours on per each incident and compensates 1.5 times the regular rate of pay. So this is available to employees who are called to perform work on site, but also is currently available, if an IT employee, for example, were contacted and could perform the duties at their home remotely. The proposed changes to this, we would like to specify that upon pending passing of the on-call pay policy, that those that would receive that $2 per hour wouldn't also be eligible to receive this call-in pay, right? So they're not double dipping per se. So we just wanted to add that carve out. And the second piece that we added was language to clarify that only employees that are physically required to report to work in person would be eligible to receive the call-in pay moving forward. So this is anticipated. There wouldn't be a fiscal impact to this and would be anticipated to actually save the county dollars just by allowing remote workers to simply make a quick 5-minute fix or something like that. This would be more specific to like a highway worker that is called in to physically perform duties on site. And the next change to the overtime policy is specific to comp time. And I will just define comp time. So this is time off that can be earned in lieu of overtime pay, which accrues at 1.5 times the hours that are worked over and above 40 within the work week. So currently comp time is only able to be earned by hourly employees. Hourly employees are non-exempt, meaning that they are entitled to overtime pay when they exceed more than 40 hours worked within our work week. It does not allow employees to use or earn comp time in the last 3 payroll periods of the year. And this is because a few years ago, it was determined that we wouldn't be able to allow comp time to roll over from year to year. So there had to be a payout process implemented. And at that point in time, it was estimated that 3 payroll periods would be needed in order to process those payouts. We have recognized that 3 payroll periods maybe isn't fully needed, and we wanted to allow more time for employees to use the comp time that they accrued, which would be beneficial to the county, and that we wouldn't have to pay out those hours if they weren't able to use them before the end of the year. So our first piece is to change our second piece with overtime policy would be to reduce that window of time where they're not able to use or accrue the time from the last 3 pay periods to, and bear with me, the last day of the 25th payroll period of each calendar year would be the cutoff date. And for this year, that would be December 3rd, 2023. So it does provide at least 2 to 3 more weeks of a time frame that employees are able to use that comp time. There's usually rifle season in November and things like that, where employees would appreciate the ability to use that time. The expected fiscal impact would be a savings to the county, again, just allowing employees more time to use it before it has to be paid out. And that concludes my summary. Are there any questions?
It does not appear so.
Thank you for your time.
All right, then. Any speaking to the resolution? Silence. Okay. Let's go ahead and vote on that one then. This is, oh, wait, Supervisor Steen. Oh. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. B2, we are almost done, folks. Resolution recognizing Workers' Memorial Day. I need a motion and a second. Supervisor Steen and Supervisor Headland. Supervisor Headland speaking to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is something we've done in the past, and I hope we continue to do. As you know, we have a Memorial Day which celebrates the loss of and the sacrifices given by our military and related people in those aspects. Very much deserved, and we've done it for years and years. This is a Memorial Day to recognize those who have given their lives in duty to the county or to the state or to the local municipality. And so I very much recommend that we do it again and recognize those people. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Headland. Any other speaking to the resolution? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. 12, announcements. Our next county board meeting will be Wednesday, May 17th, 2023 at 7:00 p.m. And that's all I've got. Oh, wait, Andrew.
There's been some requests from some of the supervisors to actually do a county tour to piggyback off of the highway tour that Dustin did such a great job at. And so we're looking at dates on either Wednesday, June 7th or Thursday, June 8th to do a county tour of the facilities for supervisors who are interested. I will have a solidified date for you by May, but I want you to put those dates on your calendar, either June 7th or June 8th. We'll tour the various county facilities.
All right. That concludes our business and we are adjourned.